Our hardware is ancient. Our software update, which is the current environment that we live in, arrived just yesterday, not 50,000 years ago. So our hardware cannot keep up with modern changes.
We'd love to romanticize the fact that these aren't our genes, but whether we like it or not, this is what we're wired for.
Frailty is a modern evolution of this mismatch theory, where now we have to be very careful about how we actually treat our bodies and the environment we're putting our bodies through in order to avoid that frailty at the end of life.
You can move your body, you can eat real food, you can sleep in the dark, you can connect with other human beings, you can manage stress, and when you do these things consistently, you're not fighting your biology, you're finally working with it.
It's not about biohacking or optimization just for its own sake. It's about closing that gap between how we were built to live and how we're actually living today. Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the MD Longevity Lab podcast, where we are playing the long game. I'm Dr. Nisha Patel.
And I'm Vikas Patel, and today is a big one for us, Nish. It is our 25th episode, which is our 1-year anniversary.
Yeah, 1 year, 25 episodes, and we're still married. We haven't stabbed each other in the eyes yet. Not yet. Our kids used to say, 1 year ago when we first started recording, that every time you go in that room, you guys start yelling at each other. And they weren't wrong.
They did ask us if we were going to get divorced.
That was episode 2. We're either this podcast is going to be the death of us, or, we just have to stop the podcast. But you guys have heard us go at it, and we survived. And I think we've evolved, right? We figured it out.
That's right.
But doing this podcast, I have to say, it's given me a greater appreciation for who you are and what we are together. We push each other, we challenge each other, and sometimes we most definitely annoy the hell out of each other. But the truth is, and I say this all the time when we're in the thick of an argument, and it's we've just got to figure it out. You can't do the shit without me, and I can't do the shit without you. So let's figure it out. Figure it out. That's it.
Am I being yelled at right now?
No, you're not. But in case, if we were going to get in a fight right now, that's what you should tell yourself to.
Okay.
Yeah. Just figure it out.
Let's LFG.
LFG. Let's go.
So here we are, 16 years of marriage, 15 years of parenting, 11 years of working together. This is our 3rd year of MD Longevity Lab, 2nd year now of the podcast. So I think we've made it.
We made it.
As far as the podcast goes, thousands of downloads, 5-star rating so far. We had a great interview with Matt Caberline a couple months back. Honestly, the response from our community has been great and humbling, and we don't say that lightly.
We don't. I mean, we get DMs all the time from people saying they ordered their LP(a) because they heard it on our podcast, or they started lifting because of the muscle episode. And that's why we do this, right? We want to democratize this information and empower as many of you as we can to hopefully take care of your own health. And quick reminder before we dive into today's special episode, if you're getting something out of this podcast, please follow us on Instagram at MD Longevity Lab. Check out our free Substack where we go even deeper into the science, and head to mdlongevitylab.com if you're interested in checking out our clinic and taking the next step in testing.
So today for our anniversary, we wanted to do something special. We're not covering a single lab value or supplement stack. We're going to do the foundation, the big idea that sits underneath everything that we've talked about on the show over the last year. We're talking about, I like to call evolutionary mismatch theory.
Yeah. This is the why behind the what. If you've ever wondered why heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and depression are exploding in modern societies, but are virtually absent in the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations, this episode is your answer.
And I'll be honest, the evolutionary mismatch theory is deeply personal to me. It's actually the central thesis of a book I've been writing this last year, which should be coming out before the end of the year, but more on that later. First, let's kind of build this up from the ground up. So what is evolutionary mismatch? It's really the idea that our genes were selected for an environment that's fundamentally different from the one that we live in currently. And that gap between what our bodies expect and what they're actually seeing is really the driver for what the majority of modern chronic disease is.
Yeah, Vikas, why don't you give people a feel for the timeline? Because I think that's what makes this so striking.
Yeah, so the genus Homo, which is our lineage, has been around for roughly 2 million years. For about 99.5% of that time, we lived as hunter-gatherers, small nomadic bands. There was no real agriculture, no stores of grain, no refrigeration, no electricity. Our ancestors walked 8 to 12 miles a day. They ate seasonally. They slept when it got dark out and woke when it got light. Their stress came in short, intense bursts. A predator, perhaps a rival tribe, a storm, and then their stress resolves. Agriculture really just came about in the last 10,000 years, and industrialization maybe about 250 years ago. The processed food revolution, the smartphone, 24/7 artificial light cycle, sedentary work, all of that is really just the last 100 years or so. Some of it less than just 20 years.
And I think the key insight here is that evolution doesn't work on that timeline. Natural selection needs tens of thousands of years and generations to meaningfully reshape and adapt our genome. We've had maybe 500 generations since agriculture. That's it. So genetically, we're almost identical to our Paleolithic ancestors, right?
Exactly. Like if you consider that our genes really have not changed in the last 50,000 years, you start to understand that our hardware is ancient. Our software update, which is the current environment that we live in, arrived just yesterday, not 50,000 years ago. So our hardware cannot keep up with modern changes.
Yeah, let's make this concrete. Can you give people some examples that they can tangibly feel?
Sure. So let's take our appetite regulation system. For 2 million years, calories were scarce, and that was really the norm. So evolution built us with a powerful drive to seek out calorie-dense food, especially sugars and fats, and a relatively weak stop eating signal. That was a brilliant survival advantage and adaptation when the next meal was pretty uncertain. But now we live in a world engineered with hyper-palatable food available 24 hours a day. The system that once kept us alive is now really the main driver for obesity, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, or the stress response. That's one of my favorites. There's this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that HPA axis evolved for acute threats, right? A burst of cortisol that helps you run from a lion or a predator. Your heart rate spikes, glucose floods in the bloodstream, your non-essential systems shut down. We call that fight or flight. And it's supposed to be temporary, and then it resolves. You're safe, the lion or predator went away, your cortisol drops, you rest. But now that same system is activated by traffic. I know it gets activated for me because I have road rage, traffic, by work emails at 11 p.m., social media comparison, financial anxiety, anxiety about our kids' school, everything. The stressors never really resolve, and chronic cortisol elevation drives insulin resistance, visceral fat deposition, hippocampal atrophy, immune suppression. It basically touches everything.
How many times have we heard people say, I want to check my cortisol? expecting that they actually have some sort of disease causing cortisol elevation. It's really chronic stress, sleep deprivation, the political climate, are your kids getting into college? It's all of these things that are keeping people's cortisol elevated. It's not the immediate threat of a predator, which is the spike and then it resolves once the predator is gone.
It's a lot of little inundated threats that are coming that never really go away.
Exactly. Another example is our sleep. So our circadian biology evolved around the solar cycle. We never were meant to see bright blue light at midnight. But now we carry these little supercomputers in our pockets that beam light directly into our retinas at all hours. The result is suppressed melatonin, disrupted circadian rhythm, impaired glymphatic clearance, right? That's the fluid, CSF fluid, cleansing our brain at nighttime, which we talked about in our sleep episode. And over time, this leads to an increased risk of metabolic syndrome, depression, anxiety, and ultimately neurodegeneration.
Yeah, and it's not just one of these things, it's all of them simultaneously occurring, compounding on each other. And that's the evolutionary mismatch.
And I think this is where it gets really important about how we think about disease, because the dominant narrative in medicine is that chronic diseases are just things that happen to us. They're bad luck, they're bad genes, it's aging. And the treatment model is wait for something to break, and then we will manage it with this treatment or this drug.
Which, to be fair, is something we were both trained to do in medical school. Vikas spent 20 years in emergency medicine. I practiced primary care. We were excellent at diagnosing disease and treating disease. We were never really taught to ask why the disease was happening in the first place.
Right. And I think that's the real shift. When you look at chronic disease through the lens of evolutionary mismatch, you don't see broken people or just bad luck. You see normal biological systems operating in truly an abnormal environment. That is what our modern view of environment is. It's abnormal compared to our evolution. So the disease is honestly expected output when you feed this ancient hardware these modern inputs.
Yeah, so why don't you walk us through the big ones, the big chronic disease drivers?
Many of our listeners know from books like Outlive about the Four Horsemen of chronic disease. So that's heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and metabolic disease. And I think that framework is incredibly useful. But in the book I've been working on, I expand it to six horsemen. I add frailty as a distinct entity, as well as mood disorders or mental illness, because I think those two have either been folded into other categories or just frankly been ignored, and they each have their own clear evolutionary mismatch story. So let me walk through each one of these briefly through the lens of mismatch. Heart disease. Our cardiovascular system evolved for constant low-level movement, right? So that means walking, carrying, climbing. Our ancestors didn't really have chairs. They didn't sit for 8 hours a day. And their diet was just naturally anti-inflammatory. Wild game, fibrous plants, omega-3 rich fish. Compare that to now, we're sedentary. Our diets are actually pro-inflammatory, as we've talked in the UPF or ultra processed foods episodes, and our arteries are really paying the price. Atherosclerosis is not an inevitable fact of aging. It's an environmental mismatch disease.
And we should say we don't see atherosclerosis or heart disease in studied hunter-gatherer populations. To this day, there are tribes in Bolivia that have been extensively studied, and they have the lowest rates of coronary artery disease ever recorded. So it's not genetics that's protecting them, it's their lifestyle.
Exactly. Let's talk about cancer a little bit. This one's a little bit more nuanced, but the mismatch is real. Our repair and surveillance mechanisms, things like autophagy and immune surveillance, they evolved in the context of periodic fasting, high physical activity, and low chronic inflammation. All three of those are extremely disrupted in modern life. We eat constantly, we are quite sedentary, and we're chronically inflamed. These are the main drivers for cellular degeneration, damage to our DNA. And our immune system has the ability to repair, but it can only do repair and surveillance in the setting of the way our genes actually evolve.
And we know that cancer loves an abundance of sugar, glucose, ultra processed foods. It's literally a direct route to growing some of these.
That's exactly true. If we move on to neurodegenerative conditions, especially things like Alzheimer's, we covered this partially in our dementia episode, but the mismatch angle is worth repeating here. Our brains evolved to be constantly stimulated by novel environments, very complex social dynamics, physical movement, multisensory engagement. Now we typically spend most of our days staring at screens. We have increasingly become socially isolated, thinking that the screen is a replacement for social connection. We don't sleep particularly well. We definitely don't move enough. And the metabolic dysfunction that's upstream, which is insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, those conditions damage brains decades before our symptoms actually appear. And then we're trying to catch up after we've already started to develop some of the symptoms.
Yeah, and metabolic disease, the last one, is almost the purest mismatch story there is. And this kind of relates to every single one of the horsemen, right?
It's really the master of chronic disease for a bunch of reasons. Essentially, in metabolic disease, our insulin signaling evolved for intermittent food availability and constant movement. Insulin was meant to spike occasionally and then recede. Now it sits chronically elevated because we're eating refined carbohydrates and sugar basically 6 to 8 times a day while we're sitting. The system ends up breaking down. Insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, NAFLD, which is that fatty liver disease. These are not just diseases of excess. They are truly diseases of a mismatch between how we evolved and where we're at currently. Now I want to move on to the 2 additional chronic diseases. The first is frailty. From an evolutionary standpoint, frailty just didn't exist previously. We typically remain very active in life, and the only reason that life came to an end through the bulk of our evolution was from infection or trauma. If you made it past childhood diseases, made it past routine infections, and were able to avoid trauma, then you were able to live a relatively long life because you were constantly moving, you had whole foods, you had social bonds, and you remained relatively disease-free. We did not have a period of decline like we experience right now, especially in our country where we've talked about the 13 to 14 year mismatch between when our health span ends and when lifespan ends, that steep decline that we have. So frailty is a modern evolution of this mismatch theory, where now we have to be very careful about how we actually treat our bodies and the environment we're putting our bodies through in order to avoid that frailty at the end of life. The last one that I want to talk about is really mood disorder. And I think this is perhaps the most underappreciated one. Our brains evolved for tribal living, which we had a tight-knit bond between 30 and 50 people who we knew intimately. Those deep social bonds, the time that we spent together, exerting ourselves, time in nature, there was this clear sense of purpose, and everyone had their own role within the group. We paired that to regular sleep-wake cycles and intimate knowledge of one another. When you strip all of that away, which modern life has done very systematically, what you get is exactly what we're seeing. An epidemic of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and despair. These aren't like truly chemical imbalances in a vacuum. They're predictable outputs from an environment that our brain just was not actually developed.
And we have to be nuanced here because we're not saying that mental illness isn't real or that medication doesn't help. We're saying that maybe we should actually ask what changed in the environment before we assume the problem is purely biochemical. Are there some lifestyle interventions that we can, impose on patients to improve their mood?
This is exactly right, Nish. The question isn't like, what's wrong with you? It's what happened to your environment. By the time we're becoming symptomatic from mood disorder, we've already experienced dysfunction for quite some time. And our brain has been trying to adapt, keeping us relatively symptom free until now all of a sudden it can't compensate anymore. And this is when medications, therapy, environment change become very critical.
All right. So let's move on to what this changes about how we practice medicine as physicians. So if this evolutionary mismatch is the framework, right? If evolutionary mismatch is the root cause, what does that change about how we approach health?
Honestly, I think it changes everything. It means the most powerful interventions aren't drugs. They're really environmental corrections. It means the goal isn't to treat disease downstream. It's to realign our environment with our biology upstream. And that's really the point of every one of our episodes in this podcast. It's really that we just weren't using the word mismatch, but that's what we're trying to close. We're trying to close the gap that this mismatch has created.
Yeah. And we don't get to pick, right? We'd love to romanticize the fact that these aren't our genes, but whether we like it or not, this is what we're wired for. So when we told you to lift heavy things, that's correcting for the movement mismatch. When we told you to protect your sleep, that's correcting for that circadian rhythm mismatch. When we told you to eat real food and avoid ultra processed food garbage, that's correcting the dietary mismatch. And when we've talked about gratitude, connection, purpose, that's correcting that social mismatch.
I want to be clear about this so that people understand what this means, right? When someone says that diabetes runs in my family, what does that actually mean? It means that the genes that their body has evolved for, that their lineage evolved for, actually relatively protected them during times of famine, right? They were able to boost their blood glucose during periods of famine, which was a survival advantage. But today, in our world of excess of everything, that has become a survival disadvantage. And so that's how this mismatch theory works. It's not that you just have crappy genes. It's that your genes were selected for something that is different than what we live in now. When I was a Navy flight surgeon, this is really how military medicine thinks. You don't wait for the engine to fail. You build maintenance protocols. You think upstream. You prevent the catastrophe before it's had a chance to set in. That training is really how I think about longevity medicine today. We're not waiting for the heart attack or the cancer diagnosis. We're asking, what environmental signals is the body receiving, and are they the right ones?
Yeah, and this is the hopeful part. Because the diseases are environmental, they're largely modifiable. You can't change your genome, but you can change the inputs. You can move your body, you can eat real food, you can sleep in the dark, you can connect with other human beings, you can manage stress. And when you do these things consistently, you're not fighting your biology, you're finally working with it. And you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be consistent.
That's the whole game. That's what playing the long game actually means. It's not about biohacking or optimization just for its own sake. It's about closing that gap between how we were built to live and how we're actually living today.
So I have to say something here because Vikas has been downplaying this for the last year, and I'm not going to let him. You've been writing about this for a long time. I'm really proud of you.
Yes.
And usually am I hypercritical of you? I'm sorry. I know.
No comment?
No, it's really good. I read it.
Yeah, so I've been working on this book.
Yeah, he's been quote unquote working on a book for quite a long while now, and I can confirm that our dining room table has not been visible under thousands of manuscript pages.
Mostly like the desktop on my computer.
Yeah.
It's true. The book is actually called Playing the Long Game, Outliving Evolution and Chronic Disease. And it's essentially a deep expansion of everything that we just talked about. The evolutionary mismatch framework applied to these 6 major disease categories, what I expand or call the Six Horsemen, with the science, the evolutionary history, and really a practical playbook for each one of those disease categories.
Why don't you tell our listeners why you wrote it? Because I think that matters.
I wrote it because after, 20 years of being in the ER, I kept seeing the same thing. People arrive in crisis, right? Heart attacks, strokes, diabetic emergencies, mental health crises. By the time they reach me in the ER, I could stabilize them, but the damage had already been done. It's this idea of like, yes, I can do something in the moment to save their life or try and resolve that crisis, but you can't undo 20, 30, 40 years of wrong environmental signals. And really, the same problem is going to happen again. They're going to have another heart attack. They're going to have another stroke. They're going to have another bad infection from diabetes. And we're at that point just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. If you understand mismatch, then the interventions aren't just optional lifestyle suggestions. They're really these biological necessities. I kept thinking someone needs to really explain to patients why they're in the state that they're in well before they come to see me in the ER, because by then we're just trying to Band-Aid a fix to get them through this crisis and hopefully just get them to the next crisis. And this book is really positioned so that people have a really firm understanding of, well, why did I end up in this place? Even better, how do I prevent myself from ever getting to that place?
And I will say, as someone who's read every draft, and there's been no shortage of drafts, it is genuinely an important book. It is not a fad diet book. It's not a supplement guide or a biohack or shortcut. It's a framework for understanding why we're sick and what to do about it. It's written by a physician who has spent decades actually practicing medicine and watching the consequences of not doing anything.
Because I'm old.
We're old, yes. You're older than I am. Yes, you're old.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. So we're currently in the publication process, and I'll share more as things develop. But I wanted you guys, our listeners, this community that's been with us over the last year, to be the first to know.
And while we're making announcements, no, we're not pregnant. That would be, oh my gosh. With your vasectomy and my IUD, that would be immaculate.
Yes, immaculate. If this episode today resonated with you guys and you want to go deeper into some of the ideas between podcast episodes, we started also building something on Substack. It's at mdlongevitylab.substack.com. And it's where I'm writing longer form pieces that expand on what we cover here, deep dives into specific aspects of mismatch theory, breaking down new research, practical protocols, and some of the thinking that goes behind the book.
Yeah, and think of this as the extended director's cut of the podcast, right? So if your 45 minutes of us fighting isn't enough for you, and based on many of your DMs, it sometimes isn't, the Substack is where you're going to find a lot more information.
That's right. Though we don't fight on camera as much as we used to.
Yeah, we've gotten way better. This has been like a...
You've reined me in.
No, you've reined me in. We'd ask our friends, like, okay, who was right and who was wrong? And they'd diplomatically be like...
You both made good points. So the Substack's free to subscribe, and it's a direct line to us. We read all the comments and try and reply to everything. Hopefully it becomes a real community, and we want you to be a part of it. Again, mdlongevitylab.substack.com.
Yeah, so here we are playing the long game. 1 year down in this podcast, right? 3 years down in clinic, 25 episodes now with this one. And the question I keep coming back to is, Has this changed how people think?
I hope so, because here's what I think we want people to take away. You aren't broken. Your body is not failing you. It's doing exactly what 2 million years of evolution programmed it to do. The problem is really that the environment has changed faster than our biology can adapt. And the beautiful thing about that diagnosis is that there is actually like a treatment protocol.
Right? We have to move our body the way it was built to move, not just cardio, not just weights, all of it. Zone 2, strength training, mobility, the play. We covered this in some of our previous podcast episodes, but our ancestors did not need a gym. It was just inherently built into their day-to-day lifestyle.
That's right. Eating food that your great grandmother would recognize, prioritizing protein, minimizing all the ultra processed stuff. We covered a lot of this in that UPF episode.
Yeah, and protecting your sleep, like your brain depends on it, because it literally does. We just covered that a couple episodes ago.
Staying together, connected with one another, with other humans, real connection, not just likes and followers and subscribers. I think we covered a lot of that in our gratitude and connection episode.
Yeah, and I think I get the look of death when I say this to patients. When we say manage your stress, it's much easier said than done, but find outlets for you to kind of relieve some of that stress, whether it's meditation, therapy, find purpose, get some sunlight, spend some time outside.
None of this on a surface level is complicated, and it's not particularly expensive. None of it really requires a prescription. It really just requires this focused intention. It requires consistency and the willingness to reframe that conversation into playing the long game in a world that unfortunately really rewards us with short ones.
Yeah, and that's why we named the show what we named it, right? Playing the long game. Here in the US, we have so much excess. People prioritize a giant house, vacations, cars. But when we have that conversation of, oh, do you want a gym membership or do you want to invest in some healthy food? I mean, that they look at us like we have three heads, right? We do not budget for our own health and we just have to.
Exactly. I think that idea of playing the long game, right? Like everyone is looking for the short-term fix. It's like literally why people, even if you even think about just investing, right? People are looking for the next stock that's going to go through the roof instead of what we know. If you just put your money into a couple mutual funds that mirror the market, you end up playing the long game and doing just fine. Before we go, seriously, we wanted to thank you guys, to every single person who's listened, shared an episode, left us a review, sent us a message. You've made this first year more meaningful than we could have really imagined.
Yeah, we started this show because we believe that two physicians with real clinical experience could cut through the noise and give you guys something useful to hopefully latch onto, something honest. And the fact that you've shown up week after week tells us that this matters. So thank you.
Year 2 is going to be bigger and better, hopefully. More episodes, more guests, deeper science, and maybe a few surprises along the way.
Yeah, if today's episode resonated with you, here's what we ask. Share it with one person, one friend, one family member, one coworker who needs to hear this. And that's how we grow organically. That's how we reach the people who need it most.
And don't forget, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Leave us a 5-star review if you haven't already. Please follow us on Instagram at MD Longevity Lab and join us on our Substack.
As always, take care of yourselves. Your future self is counting on it. We'll see you next time. Keep playing the long game.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.